Hi, hello, everybody. Welcome to the For the Love of Language podcast. I am Stacy the linguist,
And I'm authentically EJ.
and we have a special guest.
Yes, today we have our special guest Taylor with us. And so I'll give her a brief introduction before we dive into our discussion here. Taylor is currently teaching Spanish to preschool through first grade while finishing her master's in world language instruction. She's also taught both French and Russian in the past. And she also focuses on home language development and supporting teachers in that effort. So we're super excited to have Taylor on today and hear some about her experience and what she's working on.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again for having me, Stacy and EJ. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, this is so exciting to have you here.
Yeah. So let's dive in. You mentioned in our chat that you've been working on a multi-literacy program at your school. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. So really the whole thing started when I was walking into the building one day, and there was a grandfather walking in with a student, and they were talking in Russian. And I speak Russian, and so I understood it. I said a few things to the child and the grandfather in Russian, got a big smile from both of them, and we went about our day. And so when I went to the teacher later to kind of ask what this child's background was, they had no idea. They didn't know that the student spoke Russian at home. I went to the child's application. The application said nothing. The application for enrollment in the school said nothing about any additional languages. Actually, it had a checkbox, and the checkbox just said other when it came to languages. And so really it kind of started this whole snowball where our school has been really focused on the concept of belonging for the past couple of years. And that's looked like, belonging being those warm, fuzzy adjectives like acceptance, respect, inclusion, support, all of the things that we want for our students. But all of that's been focused on important things like race-based belonging, gender identity-based belonging, sexuality, but really nothing about language until this point. And so when I heard you guys talking about language prestige, some big light bulbs went off in my head, and I was like, they'll find this interesting. And so that's just kind of the background. And then it kind of snowballed into really a multifaceted project. And so obviously the first step was to identify our languages.
Yeah.
I have 150 students, and I had three home languages written down: English, French, and Spanish. Through all of the identification processes we've gone through, there's actually 15 home languages in my student body of 150 students.
Wow.
And so we started that by overhauling the application. And so really trying to combat those ideas of language prestige by making really asset-based language identifiers on the application. Asking questions, and this is something that all schools can improve on, including us, asking questions like, what language assets does your student have? What languages other than English do they come into contact with? Who do they come into contact with? Or who speaks those languages to those students? Because we found some really fascinating scenarios, as I'm sure you can imagine. Like, I have a student whose mom speaks to them in Arabic at home, speaks French to them in the car. Things like these really like intricate questions that you'd never find from a checkbox.
Right.
And also all we're doing is reinforcing families' ideas of language prestige when we reduce their identity to a checkbox, especially when it's a checkbox that says other.
Right.
And so obviously that's super problematic. But so we've done that. We've updated the application. We've done a lot of work to identify home languages for students who are already in the program. So that looks like questionnaires, interviews, asking parents, making that a part of the dialogue during parent-teacher conferences. And we've gotten to know our families a lot better through that. And so what EJ was referencing was a project we've been working on that I'm calling my multilingual library project. And really the idea from that is that students must be explicitly taught that their home language is also academic.
Yes.
And that their home language is just as valuable and just as valid as English is. Yes, English is the main language of communication at school. We're not an immersion school. That is just the way it is.
Yeah.
But we can still value their languages. And so I read a really wonderful book produced by the NAUIC, which is the professional organization for early childhood education.
Mm-hmm.
And I highly recommend it to anyone in education, not just early childhood education. And it's called Advancing Equity and Embracing Diversity in Early Childhood Education. And again, that was produced by the organization NAUIC. And it is a fabulous collection of research and essays on supporting equity, supporting diversity. And the first thing in that book is their position statement. Mm-hmm. And it says in the position statement, with supporting research, that seeing your home language at school increases early literacy skills in both the home language and in English.
Yeah.
And so taking a step back and thinking, how do you do that? How do you help students who are speaking 15 different home languages see their home language at school? Because that's kind of a daunting task.
It is. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of area to cover, a lot of people to try and represent.
Right. And so the idea that we're running with right now is by doing that through literature. And so our big push right now, I actually secured a grant to fund this project.
Bravo.
Yeah.
Grants aren't easy. Let's just call that out again. Bravo for getting a grant.
It was a lot of work.
We love to see it.
Really important work. And so so step one, getting the language information, who is speaking what. Mm-hmm. Step two, getting the grant. And then the most daunting, which I wasn't expecting this, the most daunting is finding the books. Finding books.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, languages like Twi, Bengali. I know nothing about these languages. I mean, I do consider myself a polyglot. I speak 4 languages. I have taken a lot of coursework in linguistics, but identifying books that are developmentally appropriate in languages that are considered by the English-facing world to be less prestigious has been difficult.
Yeah.
What have you done that's been successful with that?
So the most successful tactic is talking to families, asking parents, saying, hey, I want to get a book that is culturally authentic, developmentally appropriate, and, just a worthwhile book in your home language. Do you have any recommendations?
That's awesome.
The responses have run the gamut because you have to consider where these parents are coming from. Most of the parents at my school grew up in English as an additional language programs. And so they were taught that their home language is not academic.
Yeah, which is absolutely tragic.
So tragic. And so that's really what we're trying to combat. And so we're working, I mentioned belonging with the student, but we're really working on belonging with the family.
Right.
And so I've had responses from, I don't know where, we don't own any books in our home language.
Oh my goodness.
To let me bring you a stack of 12. I've had every response.
Yeah.
And, but really, overall, the families have responded in such a way that they feel seen and they feel grateful, and they really do appreciate that their children are not having the same reaction to their home language at school as they did. Because if you look at the research and you look at the data, the key time for home language loss is early childhood. So when you enter school, whether that's at 2, whether that's at 5, that's when students are losing their home language, and they're being taught both implicitly and explicitly that their home language is not as important as English is.
Yeah. It's that social pressure.
Yeah, that sounds like some amazing work. I have a question, because you're working with like preschoolers through first grade and you're getting all of these books with languages that you don't understand. How do you help the students if they're like, how do you help them learn to read in these other languages if there's like alphabets and stuff that you don't know?
That's a really great question. And I just did a training for our faculty on that, on how to interact with literature that you can't read yourself in meaningful ways. And so obviously the first strategy is looking at the pictures. By procuring authentic materials, the artwork is representative of at least a subset of the culture. Obviously, we don't want to tell one story of a culture. We don't want to limit a culture to just a book, but you're able to see pictures and artwork that is authentic culturally. For example, one of the books that I've gotten for Mandarin, which is a language that I don't speak, is the story of a young girl and her mother going to the market together. And so all of the pictures they're illustrations, but they're all culturally authentic. It's items that you would find in a market in a Mandarin speaking culture.
Crazy.
Right. So the first step was using the pictures, using the illustrations, using the photographs, depending on the book. The other thing that we're working with is looking at the words themselves, even if you can't read them. Is the language using characters? Is the language using a script? Is the language using a Latin alphabet, but with added in letters that you don't necessarily see in English? And so really looking at those with the students, both the native speakers and the non-native speakers benefiting from that, seeing that, wow, look at this writing. It's different than mine, but it's just as valid as mine. It also belongs in my classroom library.
So you're not just using these books in other languages with the students that speak those languages, you're sharing them with the entire classroom.
Which I think is amazing. That's a great way to get everyone involved. Yeah.
They go on the shelf just the same. And so it's a very visual representation to all of the students and all of the families that we value it in the same way. And then the third thing that I'm encouraging that I really am excited about is finding someone who speaks the language to come in. And so I'm very, very fortunate in the fact that I speak in a school that runs, or I teach in a school that runs from preschool through 12th grade. And so we have a lot of really wonderful opportunities to do things such as language buddies. EJ, I don't know if any of your experience with international schools, if any of your schools implemented this model, but I know a lot of international schools are currently implementing this model where you find an older student who, for example's home language might be Hindi. You find a younger student whose home language is Hindi. You can group them together. They can speak the language at school. So not only are students seeing their home language at school, they're hearing it. And they're hearing it from someone who isn't their parent, which is the issue we're having with a lot of our students right now. You only hear it from your parent. And so bringing in these older students or other members of our community, the students feel a lot of pride.
Yeah.
You know, if the older student reads the book to the whole class, how much pride would a 4-year-old feel knowing that their whole class is participating in an activity in their home language? Or how much pride would a student who it isn't their home language feel knowing that they got to share that portion of that student's home culture with them? And so it's really an exciting idea and really kind of helps cement our work and belonging that we're taking the time to group younger and older students together to do this important work and to share language and share culture in a way that is just somewhat unprecedented in schools in the United States right now. But hopefully we'll continue moving away from the English as an additional language only model of supporting our multilingual students.
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask a question real fast? Are you at a public school or are you at a private school?
I'm at an independent school. And so that's why I do get the benefit of the preschool through 12th grade all on the same campus, which is a unique feature for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is an amazing program. And as someone who has seen friends and students of my own, like go through this process of like losing their language as a child and then coming back to it as like later in life. This is so important because not only are you supporting kids who are super young in developing that language further, but you're also especially with the language buddies, you're supporting them as they're going into their like teenager adulthood, making sure that they have this foundation that they're practicing, not with just their own family, but with like others as well, and kind of passing it on to the next generation.
Definitely. Yeah. This makes me think about, in one of my linguistics classes in college, we talked a good deal about bilingualism as well, and how, it can be problematic in schools if you have a child who natively speaks another language. And so sometimes it'll appear for a couple of years like the child is behind in their work, and teachers will actually think that a child is struggling or not understanding as much as they actually are, just because of the language barrier. And so historically, there's been teachers who will even tell the parents, like, you should stop speaking your native language at home.
Which is awful and horrible. And don't ever do that. Keep speaking to your child. Please.
It's terrible. It's like the worst thing that you can do, because then you're losing out on all of the benefits that would show up another year or two later from that bilingualism. Because the reality is the child actually knows way more words and way more language than a monolingual student or individual. So
that's 100% true. And I think that a lot of that comes from just teachers not being prepared to work with students who speak a different language at home in any other way other than improving their English. For example, I have a student who moved from Argentina this year and is in kindergarten. And his teacher came to me at the beginning of the year and said, this student is really struggling with their writing. How do you feel about pulling him out of Spanish class since he already speaks Spanish?
No.
Pull him out of Spanish class and give him implemented extra writing time. And I said, I understand where you're coming from. I really do. I said, let's not. Here are the reasons why. I can send you research that supports not doing that.
Yeah.
But you have to consider the point of view. And this is what I think a lot of teachers have a hard time seeing. Yes, that student is fluent in Spanish at a developmentally appropriate stage.
Yes.
And so they don't know a lot of the things we're learning. They might not know the months of the year. They might not know the days of the week, things that we work into Spanish class. And I think another part of that is just really acknowledging that world language instruction is being pushed more towards an acquisition model than a learning model.
Yep.
And so having native speakers in my class isn't a big deal. They learn. They absolutely learn just as much as the other students learn. They also bring a lot to the class. They bring a lot of enriching cultural information, a lot of enriching linguistic models, but they need to be there too to help develop their language.
Definitely. Can we just dive into that a little bit? You said an acquisition model versus a learning model. Can we explain that for our listeners?
Yes. So if you think historically, the way that languages have been taught, it's been more of language learning, grammar drills, vocab lists, all of these things where you learn the language, but you can't necessarily speak it. You haven't acquired the language. There's been a large push in world language instruction for about the past 10 years towards more of an acquisition model, more closely, not perfectly, but closely following the same way that you acquire a language, your first language. So for example, students come into my class day one, we're all Spanish. I don't teach the language. I teach content through the language.
Yes.
And so the way I do that is I work really closely with the general education teachers. Oh, you're learning about, for example, in kindergarten science right now, they're learning about animals and animal groups. That's what we're doing in Spanish. My lesson plans I was just working on for Monday, we're taking the animal groups in Spanish, recognizing the cognates because they're all Latin based, and then we're sorting animals into animal groups.
Awesome.
They'll learn the names of the animals, they'll acquire them, but it's not memorizing a list, because that's not a realistic way to learn the language.
Definitely. Yeah. The other way I've heard that explained in the past is you can learn a language or you can learn about a language. And if you're learning things like, this is the subjunctive form of the language, I can memorize all of these subjunctive forms of a verb in Spanish, but that doesn't mean that I could naturally use them. And that's like a common distinction between the way that children learn language or expect to learn language and the way that adults are expected to learn language. A lot of times adults want those like nitty gritty grammatical explanations, and that actually ends up holding them back because they're trying to like cognitively understand the language rather than like using it and putting it all in context.
Right. And don't get me wrong, I love the nitty gritty, which is why I'm a language
we all do. We're all linguists here. We all love the nitty gritty.
But I was recently having a conversation with the division director I work with at school, because we're hiring another language teacher. And I was explaining language acquisition versus language learning as to her as we start interviewing candidates. And she looked at me and she said, wait, is that why I took 4 years of Spanish and can't speak it? And I said, yes, that's exactly why.
Absolutely.
4 years of Spanish and can't speak it. And so I think that really helps make a difference with the students.
Yeah. And not just with kids, if I can share just a little bit of my experience, because I taught English to adults. And I was kind of curious at first because in my school that I taught, we had a wide language variety. We taught like everybody from everywhere, but there was like a heavy like Spanish speaking population. And I was a little surprised when they didn't ask me if I could speak Spanish. I was like, no, I can't speak Spanish, but I can teach English to pretty much anybody. And that was all that they expected. And the students got a little frustrated sometimes because, they really wanted to like understand those nitty gritties in Spanish, but I'm like, I can't provide that to you. But it makes their experience a little bit richer because we have to work together and to communicate in English to get these same ideas across. And so having that limitation for me and that limitation for my students, it actually, while it may have frustrated them, it benefited them in some other ways too. Definitely. It's that like immersion that people always talk about. And, if you're an immersion program, it's kind of like that. You have to just use the language, be around it, and that can support you as you're learning some of the nitty gritty things as well.
Absolutely. And this may or may not be something that you're aware of, but with world language acquisition, there's been a lot of research that supports the idea. And there's actually a really fantastic document from Virginia's Department of Education that says that even with students with disabilities, it is more beneficial to stay in the target language because you're not trying to translate back and forth. And so that is something definitely that I keep in mind when teaching my students as well, is that it also helps all of my students.
Yeah. When I was teaching Russian at the University of Utah, that was actually the policy, was like, as teachers, we were supposed to only speak Russian in the classroom. And so there would sometimes be like a minute or two at the end of class when I would, go back and say just a little bit in English to explain a couple points that people got really caught up on. But I would be teaching the entire class in Russian. So more than what people imagine of like the textbook version of teaching language, there was a lot of drawing and pantomiming and showing pictures and me like having the students interact with each other. And like as a model that just like after a single year of Russian classes, the students were conversational in a lot of ways in Russian.
Something I'd like to ask you, Taylor, how are teachers and the school approaching like a child when the child is using their home language at school?
It's a great question. So we don't, honestly, there isn't a ton of that, just because most of our students do come in with somewhat proficient English.
Right.
When it does happen, it is encouraged. And so when, for example, when students come in speaking with their parent in a different language and a student notices it, the teacher will comment things such as, yes, that is a different language. They're speaking X language, and kind of just celebrating it. But as far as a lot of my colleagues who teach newcomers in English as additional language programs, where we don't see as much of that at the school that I'm at.
Yeah, I was just curious because even in some programs, if you're encouraging like language use, if there's like any sort of like negative, this is just kind of good for anybody who's looking at immersion programs for their kid or whatnot. If there are sort of like punishments around using an additional language, whether you're like learning French and you have to use a little bit of English, or vice versa, if you're, in an English class, but you like need to just spew a little bit of like Spanish in order to kind of get your brain in the right headspace. Having like that positive association with like code switching and with using your home language just kind of like as necessary, it can be a real game changer for people. Having those like negative thoughts, negative things will always stick in your mind a little bit more than the positive ones. So making sure those interactions are positive is great. It's good to hear that there are positive interactions when there are like other languages being expressed around students.
So something that I do in my Spanish classes, especially with my older students, to kind of celebrate their home languages in my Spanish classroom is with the linguistic knowledge I do have and the knowledge of the students' home languages that I do have. If I know that there happens to be a cognate, for example, some of the Spanish words that are rooted in Arabic, we highlight those and we celebrate them. And I have one student who's really awesome at writing in Arabic already in first grade, and she'll come up to the board and write the word in Arabic. And so we do take that time to celebrate her and celebrate that her home language and her linguistic assets in a way that she can contribute to the class in a way that no one else can. And so we do celebrate home language use in that way, as well as, while I do obviously encourage my students to speak as much Spanish as they can in the classroom. They are little. And so if they answer me in English, it is absolutely a valid response because they were able to understand the question. And so that mode of communication, the interpretive mode of communication, they're clearly making progress there if they're able to answer me in English.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you have any advice for parents or people who are taking care of children, who are, looking for good supportive language environments in their schools and stuff? Do you have any advice for them and maybe how to approach some of this stuff? Just advice for parents in general.
Right. I would just see the best advice I would have is just be to see how the language is being used. The sign of a great language program with young students is that they're playing, is that they're doing developmentally appropriate activities in the language. And as EJ said, learning the language, not learning about the language. And so we play with the language. We'll play playground games. You learn all kinds of very functional vocabulary when you're running around tagging people. It's true. You learn so much functional vocabulary when you're playing catch. And so playing with the language, really embracing the developmental appropriateness of it versus party tricks is how I like to say it. Yes, your child might be able to count to 10 in 5 languages, but is it rote memorization, or are they understanding the correspondence that's developmentally appropriate? Can they count in the languages, or can they recite the numbers? And so really looking at programs that are taking into consideration the child's age, because it is so different to teach a 5-year-old a new language versus teaching a 15-year-old. It is. Teaching a student who can't read or write a new language is just, it's a different game. And a lot of programs try to make it the same, and it's just not.
It's definitely very, very different. Do you think, like, obviously as individuals, we can have an impact, like in schools if we're teaching there, like when my son eventually goes to school, I mean, now he's in a daycare, and I could certainly talk with the teachers there and whatnot. But do you think there's ways that we can help like spread this knowledge of like good ways of embracing other cultures and other languages in classrooms more broadly?
Just being involved. One of the local elementary schools here is getting ready to have a multicultural festival, and they are drawing from the community at large to provide resources for it.
Yeah.
Being involved, voting, voting with school board members, looking at the school board, seeing, are they embracing diversity? Are they embracing world language instruction at a young age? That's something huge here. Here in the public schools in the district I live in, due to budget cuts, there is no world language instruction anymore. And so, I mean, obviously research shows us that the younger, at least for exposure, the younger, the better. And so those are just the advocation for world language learning on all fronts, whether that's home language development or additional language learning. It starts with the community to be able to show that as an asset that the community finds valuable.
Yeah. And like you were saying, I think it would be great if people who like spoke underrepresented languages could come in and like donate books and stuff. Like that would be amazing. Giving of your time and your effort towards like towards helping the youth in your community. Like, that makes your heart happy.
Exactly. And how meaningful for the families who do speak that language to see it represented in their school and to see that it is valued. And there's no better time to combat language prestige than starting at the first day you walk into a school.
Yep.
I love that.
The age you begin school is really where it starts. You know, we're learning about being accepting on all fronts. We need to involve language there as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm wondering, so you've established this fantastic program at your school, and it sounds like it's definitely having an impact on a lot of students. And I love that, you're sharing those books with the entire classroom. So it's not just the speakers, native speakers of other languages who are benefiting, but really everyone in the classroom. I'm wondering, do you have plans to like add to this program? Are there things that you would like to do in the future that you haven't been able to do yet?
So our next step, actually, since you asked, our next step for school-wide implementation is our preschool is going to start a model to help increase belonging efforts, both linguistically and otherwise. Next year, we're going to start a program where families can sign up to come in and just share what's important to them. That can take, that's all the direction we're giving is what's important to you. That can be your language. That can be a cultural event. That can be your job. That can be an activity you like. But that's one way that we're going to continue pushing belonging throughout the school. And then we're starting all these projects in preschool, but we do have plans to implement them through elementary school as well as they grow. We're taking steps to grow controllably, but really giving families a platform to share what's important to them and help them share why. And so giving them that space to feel that their culture is academic, their home language is academic, their ability to share their job, that's academic. It's all learning. And so it belongs in the school.
That's cool.
I do have plans. I've been working with a professor right now. I do have plans to both publish and present on these concepts, just because I love them so much. And I've seen how much of a difference it's made with my students. This is something that needs to become standard practice.
Yes, absolutely.
English should not be the only language of books we have in our classrooms. It doesn't matter if the teacher can't speak any other languages. That's fine. I can't speak 12 languages.
Yeah.
I know, that's a lot. That's a lot to ask of anybody. When you do get published, please share it with us. I would love to spread it and make it available to everybody.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I have a question about involving families in this. So like for me, when I was growing up in other countries, I always picked up languages better than like my parents or other people in my family. So there were lots of scenarios when I would actually end up playing the role of interpreter for my parents. I guess, have you thought about how to help the families where like the parents aren't necessarily comfortable speaking English and like sharing their culture in those scenarios?
That's a really great question. And can I respond with a question to how you felt being the interpreter? How did that, because there's a lot of split responses on this throughout research and throughout just anecdotal information I've gathered.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Like, I did love speaking other languages. There are scenarios when I really enjoyed interpreting, and I actually considered going into interpretation as a full-time job. But there were also times when, as a child, it was really frustrating for me having to perform this role for my parents. Like, there were definitely times when I would do it because they needed me to do it. But it was, sometimes felt like an extra burden on me. Yeah. So it was kind of both things.
Right. So the camp I stay in is that children don't have jobs.
Yeah.
And so if it is a school event where parents need to be able to understand and they are not confident in their English abilities, and an interpreter should be provided, a professional one, both to ensure that it's being translated properly and to not put any additional burdens on a child, because some kids love it, but some kids see it as almost like a punishment, and that will ultimately discourage them from developing their language.
Definitely. So another question I have on that, I'm just like going deeper and deeper into this, but because you've done so much with language and with these multilingual families, I've heard of situations when you have just like family weddings or things with multiple cultures, and usually it is a family member that ends up filling this role of interpreter. Do you have maybe advice for like people or schools generally for finding good interpreters?
Oh, this actually came up in one of my grad classes the other day. And I know that there are resources, there are companies that you can call, there's lines that you can call to be placed and get an immediate interpreter
nice.
To work remotely. I've never had to use one of those resources, but I've also heard that local organizations for each individual spoken language can often point you in the right direction of finding an interpreter for kind of those non-school sanctioned events.
Right.
Definitely. And there's also things like not all of our listeners are in the United States, but there's things like the American Translators Association, where both translators and interpreters can register to be available. I know locally for me, there's also like a Utah Association of Translators and Interpreters. I don't remember the exact name of it, but there should hopefully be these kinds of organizations local to most people. And like, hopefully most schools have some kind of relationship with one of those, organizations locally.
Right. And the most schools either have a relationship or they have a standing account with the more for-profit based companies.
Yeah. I love what you're doing with books and in classrooms. That's just like such an amazing difference that you're actually making in those students' lives. I absolutely love everything you've mentioned so far. Is there anything else you would want to add about what you're working on, things that?
Yeah, and I'll note that Sarah in chat just posted a link to the book that you recommended. That will also be available in our Discord channel. If there are other sources you recommend, I'm happy to plug them here in chat as well as in Discord, so those who would like to access them can. So please let us know what else you have to say or what else you want to plug.
Well, I would just say it really comes down to making every child, in my position as an educator, making every child feel like they belong. But that's something that we can do across the board. Making offices more accepting, making neighborhoods more accepting, respecting cultures of others, respecting the language of others, and just kind of learning about those around us. We no longer live in a monocultural world. Encouraging multilingual children to grow up to be multilingual adults is really beneficial. It's in the interest of everyone. Yeah. It's not just going to affect that one child. It's going to affect the society at large, as we have these children grow up to really be citizens of the world versus citizens of a city and a state.
Exactly.
That doesn't see the world around them.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Taylor. It has been such a treasure to have you here. I am so glad we were able to get you on the pod. And if there are other resources you would like to share when you get published, not if, but when you get published, please let us know. I would love to include your work anywhere so people can read it. I would love to read it. As I love to eat that shit up.
It's really fun stuff.
Yeah, it's really fantastic. Good. It's really good. Work like this is so important. And thank you to everyone else for being here and for being involved. Thank you, EJ. You can find us here next week on For the Love of Language. I hope you all take care of yourselves and have a wonderful day. Thanks again, Taylor, for being here.
Thank you.
Follow Stacy the Linguist on Twitch for our live broadcasts, and we'll see you next time.